All right, Elena, do you know what we're talking about today?
I think today, Morgan, we're going to talk about money. Well, and more
Money.
specifically, rates.
Yes, freelance graphic design rates. So as always, quick introductions. This is the Morgan Overholt mix. I am Morgan Overholt and she's the mix.
I'm the mix. I'm Elena O'Neill. I'm Morgan's right-hand woman.
I basically, my internet claim to fame is that I've made over $500,000 on the Upwork freelance platform. That's kind of how I got my name out there. That inspired me after receiving after being featured in some articles online, including features in Business Insider and Refinery 29. People started asking me for freelance advice. And so I decided to start, giving it. Now, I will tell you, what makes you qualified to give freelance advice? Nothing. I'm just someone who has found a way to be successful freelancing online. I use both Upwork. I also work with clients in person. And I am an open book as far as sharing my experiences, both my wins and my mistakes are concerned, which brought us to present day. And one of the things I'm most frequently asked about is the topic that nobody ever wants to talk about are rates when it comes to freelancing. And more specifically, we are going to focus on graphic design rates today, just because we're graphic designers and I can't really speak on like other stuff, but I do think good news is that the equations I'm going to share today are actually applicable to lots of different industries and fields. So hopefully you'll still be able to get something out of it, even if you're maybe not primarily a graphic designer. Cool. So, and also a little bit of background, Elaine over here, she is my right-hand woman. I run Morgan Media LLC, which is a graphic design agency. And she is my lead designer. She also happens to be my sister.
Yay, which is something we don't typically share on with our clients all the time unless they get on to us or unless they are suspicious because we sound alike or we look alike. But 90% of the communication is via email, so most of the time they don't notice. But I was a graphic designer before I started working with Morgan. And I was going to say, she said, nothing qualifies her to talk about this, except for just doing it and being successful at it. And so successful that she also basically changed my career and my career path. I used to have a more traditional job, and she was so successful basically that she kind of pulled me into this world, and it changed my career for the better. And that's kind of why we do this. that's the truth of why we basically started this, because I said, I was looking at Morgan's blog, which we'll link below, and I was looking at through, comments that said like, oh, you've helped me do ABC. And I said, you've helped me a lot too. I was like, I want to help people.
Yeah. And so this is kind of like our public service, trying to help people out. Because that's the other thing. I can't respond to every single message that I get. Y'all can imagine I tend to get quite a few of them. But what I can do is put out content out there, whether it be on the blog or on this YouTube channel, which is brand new. And by the way, forgive me, because today I'm in my husband's office. And so it's a little messier than my office. Surprise, surprise. Like, look at this, y'all. Like, what is this? Like, I don't even stuff he's got in here, man. I don't know.
Wait, I want to elaborate on that. What is that?
I think
Do you
it's
actually know what it is?
It's a raptor claw can opener.
Oh,
anyway.
Fascinating. I think this could be a whole side episode. What's in my husband's office?
Right. I'm not sure I want to know. Anyway.
Make sure he doesn't subscribe.
All right. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about freelance graphic design rates. And really quickly, I'm going to kind of run through the different topics we are going to discuss so you know what to expect. We're going to try to keep this video at around the 30-ish minute mark. But I'm a blabbermouth, so we'll see how that goes. So first of all, we're going to talk about what you should know about me. And I've already said a little bit of that, how I determine my own rates. Then I'm going to show you the two equations that I've used to determine my rates over the past several years, from beginner to amateur to full-time freelance, full-time graphic designer. And then I'm also going to share an example freelance graphic design rate chart for both beginners and as well as experienced designers. And we'll at least put that up on the screen along with the equations, because it's hard to just verbalize without some kind of visual reference.
Mhm.
Then I'll also briefly touch on how I quote my own projects and provide estimates to my own clients. So hopefully it'll be quick, but it'll be chock full of actionable real advice. So and again, before we begin, so I guess I'll kind of start with the what you should know about me. I've been freelancing since I was 18 years old. My very first freelance job came from a customer at Office Max, where I was working part-time at the time. And we just had a bunch of customers coming in all the time looking for graphic design. I was only a part-time kid. And so eventually I started saying, hey, you know, how we just do this on the side. And surprise, surprise, Office Max was a short-lived career. So I was able, it wasn't my full-time thing. So after I quit, I was able to work with those clients directly. I had no idea what I was doing, but that's how the whole thing started. I feel like that's kind of a typical freelance journey though, don't you think, Al?
I mean, yeah, pretty much. You basically start, somewhere, as with anything in life, I'm sure. And you just slowly grow from there. And sometimes things fall into place.
I feel
Um,
like a lot of us freelancers, we didn't really set out to be freelancers in the beginning. It's almost like a friend said, hey, can you do this thing for me? I'll pay you $20. And you kind of, start doing it. And before you know
mhm.
it, it's a regular thing. Maybe that's just me, but that's kind of how I started out.
I
In
think that's,
27, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's how I kind of started doing it full time. And you were that friend. You said, hey, I have more work than I can handle. Can you do this flyer for me for, whatever? And I said, okay, sure. And here we are.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so today, I earn six figures a year freelancing and blogging. And my height of my freelance career, I was earning almost $200,000 take home as a freelancer. We also run Morgan Media LLC, which is a design agency, which I mentioned earlier. And nowadays we're focusing a lot on content, like what you're seeing right here, great blogs and videos and all sorts of stuff to diversify that income. All right. So first, let's talk about how I determine my own rates. Elena, I would actually like to kind of hear your thoughts on this, because in the article, which again, we will link below because I've got a full blog post on this, right, with all the good details. In the article, I talk about the difference between how I price myself as an 18-year-old who had no idea what she was doing versus, an almost 37-year-old today who's been doing it for quite some time. So, do you want to talk about how you priced yourself in the very beginning and what you based that on, if anything at all? Because I feel like a lot of us didn't really know what we were doing.
Yeah, it's always a tricky thing, I think. And especially when you're talking about money, it can be a little bit tricky for people to openly discuss. I think for me, and I imagine this is common for a lot of people, in the early days, I obviously charged a lot less. Especially as a early 20 something, college student, especially most people are fairly broke when they're in college, right? You can probably like safely say that a majority of people are kind of just getting by. And so I think, from my own experience, my pricing probably reflected that. I think back then, if I did any freelance work, it was maybe $15 an hour, $20 an hour, if that. And at the time, I thought it was great money. Um, but nowadays, it naturally grows as your client base grows, because eventually you won't be able to just keep working for $20 an hour because you don't have enough time. And so I think as you kind of grow your clients, you start increasing your rates accordingly. What
Yeah.
would you say your experience is?
No, dead on. In fact, in the article, those are literally some of the examples that I provided, which is funny that you hit that nail on the head. I mean, back then I was making $6.75 an hour, and I thought that was amazing because it was above minimum wage at the time. I was like, go me, I am a rich college student, right?
Mhm.
So when I was charging $25 for a flyer, $15 for a business card, I thought I was like really rolling in the dough. I thought I was making so much money. But your perspectives change, as do your skill sets. And of course, your skill sets also improve. Because back then, I was also creating pure raster based logos because I didn't know what a vector even was. I hadn't had any kind of real training other than just what my friends did, or watching a couple of videos online that told me what to do. And honestly, so I kind of feel like even though I was very cheap back then, honestly, I feel like those prices were probably really in line with what the value was of my work because it wasn't super high. I was a kid that didn't really know what she was doing. I was just figuring out as she went along.
Mhm.
But again, I feel like that's perfectly fine, and it's a perfectly fine thing to start out that way, especially when you don't know what you're doing, it's no big deal. And I think a lot of us have kind of been there as we get our wings.
Would you say it's real world experience, or did you go to college for that specifically, or mixture of both?
Yeah, without going on too much of a tangent, I will say that most of my experience was gained from real world experience, and watching, videos online, but more like with a purposeful sense instead of just, ooh, this looks like fun. You know? I did go and take some classes in college, but to be honest with you, it was only a minor for me at the time. It was very expensive, so I didn't do it full time. And by the time I got to class, I felt like I knew almost more than some of the professors. So I did receive some professional training, but I kind of consider myself to be self-taught. And most of that was real world experience, the way that I got
Mhm.
to where I am now. And where I
Yeah.
am now is a designer who charges, $150, anywhere from $95 to $150 an hour for my work. My rates have, more than quadrupled since the time I was an 18-year-old kid. But I also know now how to, how to manage a project and actually play that role of project manager, how to, actually provide consulting with these bigger projects. You really kind of take control and more of that manager aspect. Somebody could bring to me like a whole big complex project and I could break it down those little, bite-sized nuggets and figure out how to execute it from the design point to the content to print, et cetera. Most of our clients come to us, they don't even know what size they need or what format they need. And that's what
Mhm.
a professional graphic design will really kind of walk them through. It's almost more like an advisor position, really, I think, when you get up into that kind of higher echelon. And of course, Elena and I also were pros in every major design Adobe product, right? Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. Those are the ones that you really need to know. And when I was first starting out, I only knew like Photoshop. I learned some PageMaker back in the day, which was InDesign's grandpa. I guess it was InDesign's mommy. It was InDesign's mommy. And then I learned a little bit of InDesign, and then Illustrator. I'm completely self-taught. I've never had an Illustrator class, but I feel like a lot of the amateurs will kind of only know one program. And then, the pros, we typically have experience in all the programs and we know exactly what they're for and how to use them and why you use a specific program for a specific, deliverable, et cetera. So that's kind of the difference between, an amateur and an expert, essentially. Would you agree with that, Al?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know that you never took a Illustrator course formally. That was required when
No,
I was doing because we went through similar minors in college, and that was required for me.
nope, was
But
not
anyway,
required for me. I know.
very very interesting. But anyway, we can go ahead and proceed. I just wanted to elaborate on that some.
I had to teach myself the pin tool. Like I thought that was really hard at the time, but it also was like game changing. Okay. So I basically used, but what, okay, so to back up a little bit. So I quit my job in 2017. I quit my full-time job in 2017 and decided, hey, this freelance thing, I think it could be more than a side hustle. I think it could be a full-time career. So when I quit my job in 2017, even though at that time I was already charging, anywhere between $55 and $75 an hour out in the real world as a side hustle, I thought, if I'm going to pursue this as a business, I really need to understand my numbers. And so I started really looking into it and thinking, okay, why do I charge this? Is this market rate? Can I get more? Should I be charging less? Like, you have to understand those kinds of things if you're going to be pursuing this professionally, as a real small business. And so I used two equations to figure out my rates. And Elaine, I think I've talked to you about these before. So I use a baseline equation. And this is the equation that I use to figure out whether or not freelancing is viable and what I absolutely bare minimum need to make it so, right? So for instance, like let's use Elena as an example, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
What was your salary before you became a full-time freelancer? Do you remember what your salary was out in the real world?
It was like 30, barely over 30 grand a year. I think it was like 33 to 35 grand a year.
Okay, so let's just say $35,000 a year, right? So
Yeah.
basically, Elena's cost of living, she knew that that was the price tag that could sustain her cost of living because that's what she had before. So I always use like whatever you're making right now, whatever you're getting by on right now, or whatever you need to get by right now as that baseline. Can I at least achieve that? Because I know I can sustain myself at that level. So, and hopefully we can put this equation up on the screen, but I took my salary, or for this example, we'll take Elena's salary at $35,000 per year, and we'll divide that by our annual desired number of hours, right? So let's just say, like ballpark, we want to work 36 hours a week, right? So we'll say 36 times 52. That's 1872, 1,872 hours. Now I take that $35,000 number, divide it by 1872. And remember, I'm just taking my salary divided by my annual desired hours. And that equals a rate of $18.69 per hour. So basically, if Elena wants to work 52 hours per week and she doesn't want to take any weeks off, she wants to work 36 hours a week, she at least needs to make $18.69 per hour. Do y'all see what I'm saying there? That's like your baseline equation. And of course, we are going to get a little bit into some more details in the next equation, but that I always feel like it's helpful to look at that baseline, because I see so many freelancers who are like, oh, I'll start out by charging $10 an hour. Well, that's below minimum wage out in the real world, and you're going to have expenses and want time off and all this other stuff. Why charge less than even what you're making right now? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Elena, do you remember what your very first when you quit your full-time job, what your rate was? Was it in line with $18?
Well, it's my story is a little bit different because you kind of are the one who was offering me some of the most of the freelance at that time, I would say. But yeah, I think you were at least matching what I was currently making to make the deal a little bit sweeter. And then, I think the only caveat to that is when you're very first starting out, and if you need that very first review, which is something we've touched on before, you can take a little bit lower just to get that, first marker on the board. But then after that, you really need to be doing that math.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, there's a difference between I am learning and I'm doing this for experience versus I'm doing this to get paid. The doing work for free when you're really, really first starting out and don't know what you're doing, that's fine just to get the experience. Doing work for cheap, again, it's fine to get the experience. But once you need to once you treat it like a business, that's when these equations kind of start to come into play. You need to make sure it's viable, especially if you're going to be going full time. All right. So then that's our baseline, right? We know Elena at least needs to make, basically we'll round up, say $19 an hour to live, right? Like little 20, how old were you when you switched? Do you remember?
25. So,
25?
Basically three or 4 years post college.
All right. So 25-year-old Elena needs $19 an hour to make this just viable. Okay. But what are her goals, right? What kind of number do you want to make every year, Elena?
I would $1 million.
Let's pick an easy number, Elena, like
realistically,
100,000 for math.
All right. So at the time, I think I would have been very excited to reach 50,000. So let's say, if I was transitioning, I wanted to make 50,000 from 30 something thousand.
No.
No.
That's not a goal rate. 50,000 is a goal rate. $100,000 is like a better goal rate for an expert.
I thought we were talking about poor 25-year-old Elena.
Oh no, sorry. We switched now. We were talking about poor Elena. We know what Elena has to make. Elena has to make $18. Now we're talking about pie in the sky, Elena. What does Elena want to make?
Oh, $100,000 realistically.
Yeah, $100,000 realistically, right? So then the math changes a little bit. So now that bougie Elena, she wants to make $100,000. She's been doing this so well. She got some experience under her belt. She doesn't have any trouble getting clients. She's like, whatever, right?
Yeah, but that's like 30-year-old Elena versus 25-year-old Elena. So
well, now Elena's 30 years old in this example.
Man, Elena grew up so fast.
Don't they always? All right. So So when we're talking about goal rates, we're going to be looking at a number of variables and keeping that desired goal rate in mind, right? The things that we're going to be factoring in are four main variables. One, your desired net income. Two, your business expenses. Three, a rough tax estimate. Obviously, if you can do a better tax estimate, even better, but rough is fine. That'll get you there. And then, of course, vacation time and the number of hours you actually want to work. And then we're going to put this equation up on the screen as well. But to establish a goal rate, what we're going to do is we're going to add the following variables. We're going to add desired net income plus annual expenses plus annual taxes divided by annual hours. And that's going to get you your target hourly rate. And Elena, guess what grown-up bougie Elena needs to make to hit that $100,000 mark? Let's assume for this example that, let's use the example in the article for easy math, right? Because we've already pre-mathed that and enough to math live. So let's say that
I was sitting here wondering if you're going to make me do the math in my head. I'm like, please don't make me do that.
Elena's like getting nervous. All right.
Like sweating bullets over here. Don't make me math on screen.
So let's say that we want to take an average of 4 weeks off per year, including holidays, and clock at least 6 billable hours per day, which is also realistic, by the way, y'all, because your day is going to be interrupted by like phone calls, going to lunch, whatever. You really don't want to say you're going to work a solid 8 hours a day. That's like for employees. You're not going to work 8 hours a day, even if your butt is in that chair 8 hours a day. It's just not going to happen. So you need to be at like 6 or 7 at the most. So let's say you're going to want to get 6 billable hours per day. That gives you 233 days a year or 1,398 hours a year to reach your goal. Then you're going to factor in your business expenses. Now, those are going to include things like, software, office supplies, health insurance, and that kind of stuff, subscriptions, et cetera. And then for simple math, we're going to use a 28% average tax rate, right? We're just some super, super simple math. Plug all those numbers in, and what you're going to get is about $106 an hour. That's going to be the target you actually need to be making to be able to hit that $100,000 a year goal. Elena, talk to me about whether or not that seems achievable.
Well, I think 25-year-old Elena would be a little bit intimidated about that. However, 30-something-year-old Elena thinks that's reasonable. I would say to someone starting out, like, don't think about that as something that you have to do overnight. It's something to work up to. Yep. But that's your goal over long term.
That's a really good point, Al, because there's a point in time when you would have told me if I would charge over $100 an hour, I'd be like, what? And also, guys, I want to throw this disclaimer out here too. Even though we're talking in terms of hours, there's plenty of in fact, a lot of designers only charge fixed rate and flat rates. In fact, even me, even though I work on an hourly, with an hourly goal in mind, typically, especially with new clients, what I'll do is I'll take the project, and we'll go into details about this a little bit later on because it's one of the other topics, but I'll take the project and I'll kind of estimate in my head roughly how many hours I think it's going to take. And then I just times that by my desired hourly rate goal or the target goal I have in my mind. And then I give that client like a really rough, really rough like price tag for the overall project instead of explicitly necessarily saying, oh, I'm going to be doing this for 20 hours and $106 an hour. I just say, this is about what it's going to cost you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And a client just wants to know like what their final line item is going to be really, they want you to be efficient.
And the reason that we say that too, the reason that we don't really necessarily always highly advertise how many hours it takes us to do a specific project is that you can kind of penalize yourself on accident, right? So for instance, there's a lot of designers out there, and again, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but there's a lot of designers out there who are charging like $10 an hour still, who might think that they're amateurs. And you might look at that designer and think, oh, wow, $10 an hour is so much cheaper than the $100 an hour girl. I'm going to go with $10 an hour girl. Well, I hired a $10 an hour girl like a few years ago to do a really, really simple illustration. All right. It's something that a pro illustrator could have done in 1 hour at $100. She took 12 hours to do it. I ended up spending more money on the amateur than I would have the pro and waited 10 times the amount of time for the project to be complete. So that's why it matters a little bit. Hourly rates and how long it takes you to do a project, it's just not as important unless you see the big picture. The big picture is how long you've got to wait on the project and what the total bill is going to be. And that's why a lot of designers don't even show their clients an hourly rate or tell them exactly how much time it's going to take. They just kind of say, hey, look, this is your top line. This is what the total cost is going to be. I blew that $100,000 goal right out of the water pretty quickly, which brings us to our next topic, which is going to be talking about the freelance graphic design rate charts. All right. So what if you are still not really sure exactly what you could be charging or what you should be charging, for wherever you are in the journey? And that's what we're going to hopefully kind of talk about a little bit next. So for instance, when I hit my goal, and I started charging over $100 an hour, I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to sit here and, glass ceiling here, me here. I'm going to keep going and see what is viable. And as a basic rule of thumb, there are definitely other guides online that you can use. I'm referencing 3 different things for this particular article. I am referencing the Designers Union Minimum Design Price List. I'm also referencing the Graphic Artists Guild Handbook, and I've got a link to that in the article as well. And we'll also put a link to that in the description below. It's like the graphic designer's Bible. It's so great. It's also got templates in there for like contracts and all sorts of stuff. So it's been a really good asset, a really good thing for me over the years. And then I'm also going to include my own rates and recommendations, kind of what I really have been charging. And for y'all, this is like information that most designers do not put out there. Like we typically do not like to talk about money, at least not publicly. So this is some really special information that we're sharing in this video, and we're not messing around here. All right. As promised. Okay. Oh, and then the other thing I also wanted to say is that the real basic rule of thumb is to answer the question most succinctly, what should you be charging? You should be charging what you can get. You should be charging what the value of the product that you're putting out is worth. And that is the honest to goodness truth. 2 years from now, I could be filming a new video and telling you that my new rate's $300 an hour because for whatever reason, I now feel that my time is worth $300 an hour. These things change as we continue to provide more value to our clients. And also in our time becomes more valuable, in ourselves. So just kind of keep that in mind. These things are ever evolving. And the real answer is, what should you be charging? You should be charging what you can get. And I'm hoping we can kind of put these tables up on the screen for people can kind of see, but I've got 2 tables on my website currently. One is a table for beginners, and I don't need to break down everything because it's easier if y'all just go on there and read it. But essentially, I have listed out again what the Designers Union is recommending people charge. The Artist Guild didn't really have a baseline for beginners, so I left that column blank on this chart. And then I also had a column for what I charged personally as a beginner. And these rates were a little depressing. I ain't gonna lie. Earlier, when you were saying 10, $15 an hour, it was about that. Like I was doing logos for $50. Again, they weren't vector because I didn't know what I was doing. My average hourly rate, I think, was between 20 to $35 an hour. I would do an entire magazine ad or a flyer for $25, that kind of stuff. It was pretty low. The Designers Union is a little bit higher than even what I was charging. They recommend for beginners like more of $150 to $350 for like a logo, photography per hour, like $40 per hour, essentially, that kind of stuff. So guys, take a look at that. It's a really good reference and it kind of gives you an idea of where you should be. Again, even as a beginner, don't let that limit you. If you feel like you can get more, go get more, go get it. That's what you should be doing. Then I also have this rate chart for experts. And again, this is a little bit more robust because the Artist Guild did provide more information here. But again, I've quoted the Designers Union, the Artist Guild, and then also what I essentially charge today. And there's a range on all of these items too, because no 2 projects are ever quite alike. And we'll also talk about why ranges are important before the end of this video. But to give you an idea, the prices jump pretty dramatically. So the Designers Union is recommending $450 to $2,500 for a logo. Artist Guild, for example, charging $1,500 to $7,500 for a logo. And nowadays, our firm typically charges anywhere between $500 and $1,500 for a logo. And there are plenty of people who online would tell you that we are still dirt cheap, that they were like, oh, you've got to charge $20,000 for a logo, whatever. Great for them. Love it. Hope to be there one day. So there's no limit to this whatsoever. And then our average hourly rate is between $95 and $150 an hour currently, which is a little higher, but still in line with what the Artist Guild recommends, which is $65 to $125 an hour for an expert designer. And I'll also tell you that I've done my own research on this, and just looking like at Upwork, there are people who are more expensive, way more expensive than I am. I've seen graphic designers on there, Elena, as much as $250 an hour. So
it seems so high, but just also prices meet demand. So if you're getting inundated with requests at $100+ an hour, maybe it's time for you to raise your rates.
Well, and that's the best time to raise your rates, right? People always say, when should I raise my rates? When you're busy, that's when you should raise your rates, because you have nothing to lose whatsoever.
Absolutely.
That's when I've raised my rates every time. Whenever we're super busy, I'm like, you know what? I mean, I got too much work. I got too much work as it is. Obviously, there's demand. Obviously, I'm undercharging, so I raise my rates. So that way, if I'm going to take on any more work, it's got to be worth it at a bigger rate. And to this day, I have very, very little complaint. And my clients have also changed in scale. Now I work with larger clients who are more used to those kinds of industry rates and used to taking on bigger projects and rates that make sense for them. There's a big difference between what your cousin can afford, for like, if they hire you to knock out a wedding flyer, there's a big difference between what they could afford versus a multi-million-dollar corporation who is depending on you to be able to to deliver a multi-million-dollar pitch or deliverable.
Right. And that's kind of why I don't really love working with families or friends, but that's a side tangent as well.
It's a whole article. It's a podcast for another day.
A whole podcast in itself.
All right. So then that brings us to how I currently quote project estimates. And this is actually, I can't take full credit for this. This is sort of based off of, I'm a really big fan of The FUTUR. It's The FUTUR without an E at the end, by Chris Doe. And he is an incredible YouTuber. Like, his channel, I mean, a billion zillion subscribers. Like, he's just an absolute guru. He's one of these guys that definitely will tell you charge $20,000 for your logo, like, super inspirational. If you've never checked him out, make sure you go check him out. But this is kind of where I got this idea and strategy from. And I got to tell you that I am living proof that it works 100%. As I never really give, especially a new client, a flat rate estimate. I always throw out this really big range because I like to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. So for instance, and I always keep an hourly rate in mind, right? So how I kind of will pitch a new client today is, let's role play. So let's say you want a website, or let's say you want a logo. It's easier.
I want a logo.
All right. Well, Elena,
how much? I have a small budget.
Really?
Go.
Do you know, do you have any, tell me a little about your company. Do you have any idea of what you're looking for? What are your goals?
Well, I just started this company yesterday, and I don't really quite know what it's going to be yet, but I'll know it when I see it.
Oh, you know it when you see it. Interesting. All right. Well, I'm going to send over a few different design examples of just different techniques and different artistic styles for you to review, because I'd really like to kind of get a much better idea than that about your goals and your business and your preferences. Now that I don't want to, again, I feel like we're going down a wormhole tangent. We're new YouTubers. I apologize. But typically speaking, I actually would do a much bigger client profile if they told me I'll know it when I see it, because that's not an acceptable answer. And we have to know a lot more about the project than that. But that is an important thing that she just said, because you'll get that a lot in clients. And if I can kind of detect that the client doesn't really know what they want, especially the further on we get down in the questionnaire, then I will think, okay, I need to probably charge a little bit more, because that means we're going to be doing a lot of revisions. All right. So even though there's a lot more that would typically happen in that kind of conversation, and it'd be a lot more professional than that, that does tell me a lot that she came out swinging with that I'll know it, I see it line, which is like designer cringe. So what I would typically do is I would say, okay, well, I know that I wouldn't say this out loud, but I'd say to myself, self. So I would know that the simplest logo that never comes back with a single revision, that probably takes us like 5 or 6 hours to knock out, right? There's not doing a lot of research, whatever, like the easiest thing in the world. So we're probably looking at a baseline of like $500 for the easiest going client, no revisions, simple logo, whatever, all the way up to like $1,000 essentially. That's just kind of that range, that sweet spot. But since this client seems to not really know herself, and she started her business yesterday, so I'm sitting here thinking she probably also doesn't. First of all, she's way too early in the process to be looking for a logo, sure, but she doesn't really know a lot about the process. And hopefully, I've learned a lot more about her and the longer conversation that we would ideally have in that situation. But I would probably kind of put a little bit of an exponent on that, thinking, all right, she's going to want to go back and forth quite a lot more than a client that says, yes, I know exactly what I want. I like this font. I like this color. These are the styles that I like, and blah, 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 right? So for Elaine, I might come back and say, oh, okay, excellent. Well, just to kind of throw out a really rough estimate, I would guess that a logo design would cost anywhere between $750 and $2,000. Is that within your budget? And then she would say,
sure. But here's, I know I didn't really play like the best client role in the world, but the point we're trying to illustrate here is that I typically find that a budget range will mostly depend on your client. And I think that's something that sometimes clients don't always realize, but especially if you're dealing with somebody new, you don't always know like that they're, how many revisions they're going to come back with. You know, if it's reproved first time, it's going to be on the lower end of that budget. If they come back 20 different times and ask for 20 separate edits, it's going to be on the way high end of that budget. So you really want to keep that in mind, and maybe even mention that to the client. If you're budget conscious, really try to think about what you want ahead of time. Try to rein that in a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good tip for clients to be able to stay on target and on budget. And a lot of times I tell them that. I say, hey, look, if you want to stay on budget, if you want to stay within that range that we originally provided, then here's how. You avoid scope creep. You don't add additional things to the project. We are going to charge for additional aspects of, if you say, oh, and I want a business card, oh, and I want to go in a completely different direction than what we originally talked about. Yeah. Those things all have an extra charge in them. They're going to take extra time. And so staying within that range is really, it's less my responsibility than it is yours. But the range does two things essentially. It gives you quite a bit of wiggle room, right? So where if you need to charge more, you absolutely can, no sweat. So it provides that extra padding in there for you. But the range also, if you throw it out fairly early on in the conversation, and I'm talking about after you've gathered some basic requirements, but before you've had an hour-long conversation about something, okay? Because that's turned as more of a consult than it is, requirements gathering. That it kind of tells you whether or not that client can afford your services. And it's really important for me to determine that really early on, because when I was first, kind of going out and trying to pitch clients in the real world, I kept falling into this trap of I would be talking to them for 2 or 3 hours before we ever even throw out a budget. And at the end of that 2-hour investment, they are like, oh, and by the way, I can afford $100. And I'm like, well, I've really wasted my time today. So I like to throw that out pretty early too and see the reaction, if they're like, if that's uncomfortable for them, that's important information for you to know so you can adjust accordingly. Or if they're like, oh, dang, that's cheap. You're like, well, I can raise my rates the next time,
Right.
So it's really important though, to kind of get that reaction and to make sure it's within their budget before you have a much lengthier conversation. And provide yourself that wiggle room, because you never know what's going to happen, especially if you are subcontracting out a portion of the project and that subcontractor falls through, or like I said, the client wants to change direction, or that you mess up, you go in a different direction than what you understood the client wanted you to do. And hopefully you don't do that. Hopefully you're getting your requirements, right the first time. But it's always nice to have just a little bit of oopsie space in there, just in case.
Even if you cross your I's and dot your T's, the client will inevitably change their mind. So it's nice to have that wiggle room. I've worked with clients that, I say, okay, this is kind of what I have in mind. This is the direction I'm going to go in. And they'll say, okay, yeah, sounds great. And then I deliver that. And they say, oh, actually, I have the second idea. Can we see what this looks like? And then you do that second idea. And then they say, oh, actually, I like that first idea better. Let's just stick with that. And so it doesn't really matter. You can try your best to kind of rein these people in and say, okay, really think about what you like, what you don't like, what do you want to see? And it could still kind of go off the rails a little bit.
Do you ever quote ranges when you quote projects, Elena?
I mean, I try to. That's something I learned from you. I think sometimes I try to be a little bit too nice. I'm not really quite as dir- harsh or direct or I don't know, like I'm not really as good about being firm. So sometimes I'll be like, oh, I think I can do, I need to get better at it. That's why I kind of like working through you sometimes, because you're more firm about like, nope, this is what it's going to cost. Um, it's a skill to have because it can be intimidating. And especially when you're starting out, you can question yourself of like, oh, am I worth that much? Oh, well, I can underestimate if it goes, over, because you don't want to make anybody angry. I've definitely been guilty of that for sure. But it's,
I'm before we wrap up, I'm really glad you kind of brought that up because you're right. It's something I don't even think about versus when I was younger. I thought about it all the time. I was intimidated and afraid to throw a number out. It's like, oh, I couldn't possibly charge that. Oh, I
Mhm.
couldn't talk about money. But today I don't really care. And the difference is that today, back then I was desperate for the money. And that does affect how you charge. Today, I'm not desperate for the money. Today, we keep a full schedule between our clients and our blogs. And so it doesn't make financial
Mhm.
sense for me to onboard a new client, anything less than $150 an hour, because that is the rate that I've determined that I not only offer value, an equivalent value to my clients, but I also have determined that creating content like this in the blog, which we use to make affiliate and ad revenue, is worth in the long run about $150 an hour, and that
Mhm.
price will continue to creep. So if I'm not getting at least $150 an hour on my graphic design, then I'm kind of losing money because I could be making $150 an hour on my
Mhm.
blog. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, that's an
It's
important way to work at, think of it. It's opportunity cost as well. And to
mhm,
clarify something you said earlier, you said you range between 95 to 150 an hour. That
currently.
95 currently, that 95 is basically grandfathered in clients who started, at a much lower rate, and you don't
Mhm.
want to jump them over overnight to more than 50%, right?
Yeah. Well, we've got contracts. Yeah, we've got existing contracts. And I don't, I've always increased my rates over the years incrementally. And so I don't break a contract or say, hey, look, aha, you sucker, you're going to be charging more now. So I will raise my rates on new clients on the onboarding rate first. And then later, like after a year or two or whatever that the contract looks like, then I'll kind of raise my other clients. But yeah, everybody, if you're already with me, you get grandfathered in and whatever we originally talked about, or sometimes you're just like, a few months behind whatever that rate increases to give you a little bit more time to plan and
Mhm.
adjust. But yeah, typically that's kind of where that range comes into play. I also want to go back and talk about really quickly, Elena, before we are parting thoughts, because you said, it takes a lot of bravery. I want you guys to think of yourselves in a real world position. Like, let's say that we're at a steak restaurant. Let's say we're like at Fleming's or something, right? Which is like a semi-fancy steak restaurant chain, and I order, Elena's the waiter, and I say, well, how much is the 8-ounce filet? And Elena, how much is the 8-ounce filet today?
$50.
Actually, I can't afford $50. Can I have it for 10?
No, get out.
So see, that just doesn't happen in the real world. And I think it's one of the reasons why I've been to me, quoting rates is a lot easier because that is just the rate. Like, to me, it's not
Mhm.
negotiable. Maybe
Yeah,
it
no,
was at
that's
one point, but it's not negotiable anymore. And there's
right.
a lot of situations where you would never negotiate in the real world. And if you can't afford that $65 steak, then you need to be going somewhere else. There's always somebody that can do it cheaper. You might not
Mhm.
be getting the same quality product. McDonald's is right down the road. You can go through the drive-through. They get a hamburger for like $2.50. It's
Yeah.
fine. Like, go
And
get
look,
your hamburger.
and no offense to McDonald's. Some people love McDonald's, but
McDonald's is great.
but
Great fries.
but think but think of yourself as that $50 steak.
Yeah. Think of yourself as a $50 steak, because trust me, there is some, and if they can't afford it, that's perfectly fine. Then they need to go find somebody with a little bit less experience who's trying to do this, for the experience and who is charging lower rates or what have you. There's a lid for
Mhm.
absolutely every pot. And hopefully one day you can strive to be the designer that, big companies are coming to for big solutions. They know they can count on you. They know you'll deliver a quality product on time, every time, that will make them a lot of money. And that will hopefully eventually be your goal. And that is definitely the kind of client that we serve today. And we love, the only thing I love more than making money is making my clients a lot of money. So that's definitely what we are after.
Mhm.
Today is professional graphic designers and professional content creators. And but yeah, there's go out if you can't afford my rate, Typically I also try to still be helpful. I try to like recommend other people that who maybe they can't afford, and try to give other people, a leg up and an
Mhm.
opportunity.
Yeah.
So
And there's no shame in that too. I don't want anybody, to feel bad. I mean, but
we were
typically
all
a
there.
larger, yeah,
We were
we were
there.
all there. We were all there. And, and a larger company will have that kind of budget. So just keep that in mind too. I think from a client's perspective, that's, I touched on earlier. That's why I don't really like working with friends and family, because often they don't need, like like an expert level graphic designer. If you just have a
Yeah.
hobby and you want like a quick logo, go to a beginner. Like they're going to love
Yes.
to have the money, and you're not going to need to spend like $1,000 on a logo. So everybody can still win.
It's
So just
overkill.
keep that in
Yes.
mind.
I heard this phrase the other day, is trying to like kill ants with a hammer, but it's true. It's way overkill. You don't need somebody like us to do like a quick, like little birthday flyer, for your 5-year-old. I mean, and it's still a very important project, but you can find a designer who maybe specializes in that. All right, so I think that pretty much wraps it up. Let me know if y'all have any questions or comments in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. And again, don't forget to check out the full article on graphic design rates and what you should be charging, which we will also link in the description box. And finally, look, I'm going to remember to promote myself. Make sure to follow me on social media, Morgan O Media on both Twitter and Instagram, and like and subscribe on this channel, Morgan Overholt Mix.
All right. Thank you. Till next time. You're adorable. Okay. Say goodbye.
Bye, Jay.
Say goodbye.
Bye.